As Harry said, my name is Allan Stokes. I'm Director of Environmental Programs with the National Pork Board. And you folks are all familiar with the pork checkoff. The Environment Committee has also been leading the work of the pork checkoff for actually the last 6 years in developing an overall environmental sustainability, a sustainability framework for the pork industry. And I'd like to take a few minutes and just share some of the work we've been doing and kind of the journey we've been following. As you kind of heard this morning on some of the opening comments in the plenary session, there's the big question of what are we going to do to feed 9 to 10 billion people in the year 2050. In fact, that number seems to keep growing. And there are thoughts that we're going to have to increase food production by 70 to 80%, perhaps even double food production by the year 2050 to feed that population. You also heard one of the speakers talk about that there's less than 2% of the population that's involved in agriculture that's supposed to feed the folks in the world. Even the United Nations, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, recognizes that agriculture is going to play an important role and points out that with the task of trying to feed the increasing population over the course of the years, it may not be real world to expect. In this particular case, they were talking about greenhouse gas or carbon emissions, but I think it holds true for all of the environmental impacts. It may not be real world to expect to see that we'll actually reduce the total volume of greenhouse gas or the total volume of water that we require to produce animals, produce meat, or any of the other environmental impacts. But really, what we ought to be striving for is producing more food without increasing those burdens or increasing the demand on resources. In short, become more efficient. Pork producers have always considered it to be an important part of their task to safeguard the environment. And that goes without saying. They rely on the environment for their production. They rely on the water for watering the animals. They rely on the water for their own domestic use for their families. They don't want to insult environmental impacts on water quality and surface waters and streams because that's where they recreate. And very often use that water that traverses through their property. So they've got a vested interest in protecting the environment. Pork producers have not just given environmental protection lip service, they've actually put their money where their mouth is. In the 7-year period from 1997 to 2014, we've invested over $7.5 million of producers' checkoff money in doing environmental research, researching new and improved practices and technologies to help protect the environment while still carrying out their primary task of raising healthy animals and providing a safe pork product for consumers. And that $7.5 million doesn't include an additional $5 million that was devoted to fund the pork portion of a national air emissions monitoring study where we provided the dollars. The United States Environmental Protection Agency actually had control over how that study was put together and how it was conducted to provide insight and input into their deliberations of looking at to what extent our livestock operations perhaps posing an issue when it comes to air quality. And what if at any levels would they think that they need to be involved in some form of a regulatory control. Why have we done all this? Because pork producers know it's the right thing to do, and it's fully consistent with the 6 care ethical principles that the pork industry adopted a number of years back and pork producers are following. Specifically, safeguard natural resources and all their practices is one of those ethical principles. As you heard in the morning session, and especially the last two speakers, the marketplace is changing. People don't know where their food comes from, but whether it's because of their own special interest or special interest from outside having impact on their philosophies, The tastes of consumers are changing in terms of what they want to know about the food that they consume and where it comes from and how it's produced, at least to a narrow focus of does it meet their perception of safety and quality without fully understanding what goes into the production of that food. Perhaps more importantly, it's really in the best interest of the pork producers. Don't need to tell you folks that it's ever more competitive world in the marketplace, both domestically as well as internationally. Prices increase. When you see corn prices raised, they have fortunately come down a little bit, at least from our perspective, probably not from the perspective of the corn growers, but as we see the costs, input costs increase, anything we can do to become more efficient will help us reduce our input costs and help our producers stay more competitive in an ever more competitive marketplace. Consistent with the United Nations IPCC, kind of admonition that what we ought to be shooting for is more efficiency. We had a study conducted in 2009 that took a look at the 50 years comparison of the hog herd from 1959 to 2009. And you see on the chart before you, we've documented that we've had some market improvement in our production practices. Significantly increased the number of hogs going to market while at the same time decreasing the breeding herd that produces those pigs going to the market. Significantly improved the carcass weight, the amount of meat that's coming from those animals going to market, while at the same time improving our feed efficiency, reducing the amount of water that goes into producing an animal, and reducing our land use. Actual land use reduction of 59%. If you look at it based on carcass weight of animal produced from that land, it's more like a 78% reduction. And reducing our carbon footprint in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions by 35%. We didn't want to just rest on our laurels. That was kind of a fairly crude first look. And so the Environment Committee, which is driven by pork producers, and to whom I answer along with answering to the board of directors, the Environment Committee started down the task in 2009 of developing what we call the 4 pillars of environmental sustainability, looking at the carbon, water, land, and air footprints of pork production. We engaged the folks at the University of Arkansas Center for Agriculture and Rural Sustainability to do this work. They have vast expertise and experience in doing what's called life cycle assessments, where you essentially track a product from its beginning to a defined endpoint. It's really kind of an accounting system of what are the inputs or the extractions from the environment, inputs from the upstream sources that go into the next phase onto an end product. So we asked those folks to do the work for us. We gave them a couple of conditions. First, the data that they derive should be from, for the most part, from peer-reviewed open sources of data. There's a lot of places you can go to now, and you can get on the website and say, put in, well, I ate a pork chop and green beans and a baked potato, and it will tell you what the carbon footprint was of your meal. The problem is you don't know where those numbers came from and what backs them up. And so we told the folks at Arkansas, we want you to use available open sources of data, and the work that we do, we want to be open and available to the public outside as well. We want to add to the body of knowledge. We had them take a 3-phase approach. First is a literature review to find out what was already known, whether it be in the international community or whether any previous work had been done in the swine sector in the United States. We weren't aware of any, but we needed to have a literature review done. That literature review also helped provide some of the information that went into the life cycle assessments. Then to do a scan level life cycle assessment, it's kind of a 50,000-foot picture that took a look at the footprint of the industry, whether it be carbon or the water or the land footprint from field to the consumer's fork, and also included disposal of packaging and disposal of wasted or unused food. That was really to get an understanding of where the live swine productions fit into the overall footprint of a pork product. We took a look at then a detailed life cycle assessment that really got more in depth of field to farm gate. What's really the breakdown of the footprint to have a finished animal at the gate ready to go to harvest. For the scan level, we expressed that we wanted the footprints to be articulated based on a 4-ounce serving of boneless pork, undifferentiated pork, not a specific cut, but 4-ounce serving of pork, 4-ounce boneless pork, and that the detailed live swine life cycle assessment be articulated based on per pound of live weight ready to be sent to harvest. The field to finished product was the scope. Field of the 4-ounce boneless serving on a fork for a consumer. More importantly, for the detailed swine is field to the farm gate. It included everything that goes into the production except the infrastructure, the footprint for the grading and the gates and the buildings themselves were not included, but it did include fuels, did include heating, all of those other inputs. We decided to start with the pork's carbon footprint, even though we know by the U.S. greenhouse gas report, the annual or biannual report that U.S. EPA puts together to report to the international community on the greenhouse gas emissions from the U.S., that the live swine side is a very small portion of the overall greenhouse gas contribution in the United States, approximately 1/3%. That we decided to start with the carbon footprint because at the time that was the hot topic and the one that was being discussed the most, and frankly was one of the easier ones to deal with in terms of available data and known methodologies. The folks at Arkansas completed the carbon footprint, and you see the numbers there. That 3.8 pounds of carbon dioxide equivalent dressed carcass weight at the farm gate puts us in the ballpark, actually better than a lot of the international community, on a par with other segments, certainly not at a disadvantage to any of the other major pork production regions. In fact, better than most. Again, on the CO2 equivalent, when you're looking at carbon footprint, it's all based on a common denominator of carbon. So you have carbon dioxide, nitrogen oxide, and methane, which are your three key components when it comes to carbon or greenhouse gas emissions out of livestock production. And each one of those has varying strengths. Carbon being one, methane being about the equivalent, and the international community seems to change the number about every other year, about equivalent to 285 units 25 units of carbon, and nitrous oxide being 285, the equivalent of 285 units of carbon dioxide. So that's what the CO2e relates to. And again, you see the number about 2.5 pounds of CO2 equivalent for a 4-ounce boneless serving of pork. And that is inclusive of on-farm use of fuels, whether it's for heating the barns or motor vehicles, supporting the operation, transportation to harvest, processing, packaging, etc. The bar graph on the left is for the field to fork carbon footprint, and again, remembering that we did the scan level to find out where the live swine segment fit into the overall footprint, and you can see that about 62% comes from the live swine production. What really surprised the folks at Arkansas and surprised us, frankly, was if you take a look at the retail and consumption, the combined footprint there. We really kind of caught us a bit by surprise, and really to find out that the processing side was relatively low compared to what we would have anticipated going in. But more important for our purposes, when we really focus on the live swine side, because that's, after all, the only thing our producers can impact, is the breakdown and the bar graph on the right, where we see that fully 42% of the greenhouse gas or the carbon footprint comes from feed. The other portion, other significant portion being from manure. But please keep in mind that feed component. We took a look at the water footprint, and having completed the water footprint, we see that you see the numbers there, about 18 to 19 gallons per pound of live weight at the farm gate, or 8.2 gallons per 4-ounce boneless serving. Again, inclusive of all of those components. Perhaps more importantly for us, and it would be your computer that would do that to me. We tested it over another computer that they had here. That category name value there is the on-farm portion, which really relates to that segment of the water footprint that's on the farm compared to live transport, processing, packaging, and retail. But the significant thing is based on a field to fork. Again, this is the field of the consumer eating a product. The swine rations, the feed component is fully 84% of the water footprint. If you look at the field to farm gate, that number on the large piece of the pie is about 89 to 90%, and that's again the feed component. The smaller portion of the pie is the on-farm segment in the field to farm gate. Again, I apologize for the category name. We've tried everything, and this presentation works fine on every computer except when you actually go to give the presentation. It's just there's some sort of a Murphy's Law in there somewhere. But again, the major answer here, the major component is that feed component. And it surprised the heck out of me, and I got into some really significant arguments with the folks at Arkansas. I made them go back and rerun the numbers about 4 or 5 times, and I went and made a visit, and they sat down and walked me through it. The main issue here is we're talking on the feed side. We're not talking about rainwater. That's considered to be green water. We're not talking the gray water. We're talking blue water, that water that would be extracted from a groundwater or surface water source. And the big driver there is, surprisingly, the amount of crops that go into our feeds that come from irrigated ground. And that's what the major driving force is on that feed side. In terms of that, the smaller segment, the lighter segment that talks about the on-farm use, the breakdown there is 87% being in drinking water, 6% for cooling, 5% for washing, and 2% for other. So what does that tell us? Really, where we can have the most impact is through the feed. Obviously, we're going to continue to feed our animals, but everything we can do to improve feed efficiency, everything that our crop farmer friends and allies can do to improve their yield per acre is going to have a positive impact on both our carbon and our water footprint. On the drinking water side, when you're on the farm, clearly the animals still need to have water to thrive and survive and achieve proper welfare. But everything we can do on the farm to reduce water wastage, water spillage, is going to help on the water footprint side. As we complete each of these steps of the 4 segments of the environmental sustainability program, the 4 pillars of environmental sustainability, we are including those into a calculator. We have version 2 that's out on the streets right now that will look at the carbon and the water footprint. It's designed for a producer to sit down and use. They enter some attributes about their farm in a very user-friendly kind of format. They get a disk that has the program there. They don't have to share data with anyone. and they can get a picture of what their current carbon and water footprint is, as well as what the approximate cost for those would be. What's more important is that tool can be used if a producer wants to take a look at possible changes in their operation without ever having to invest the dollars in the first place or make the changes. They can go in and change and model their system a little bit different and see what the impact would be on the water and the carbon footprint, as well as what the approximate cost, differential cost would be of those changes. The folks at Arkansas are completing the land footprint as we speak. Actually, they're doing a final check, and I'll have the final report on that by the end of this month. And version 3 of the calculator will be released later this year. That will include the land footprint as well. It will also include an improved economic and analytical tool. Certainly, environment's a major portion of an overall sustainability effort, but it's not the only thing when you're talking about sustainable production. And of the pork producers, the pork checkoff, the folks who drive what we do, said we're not going to stop there. We want to build an overall sustainability framework for the pork industry. And so again, we contracted with the folks at the University of Arkansas Center for Ag and Rural Sustainability, Dr. Marty Matlock, who is somewhere in the building leading a similar type of effort for aquaculture, or at least engaging those folks. But Dr. Matlock worked with us, and we outlined the 9 steps that you see there when it comes to what is included in a sustainability framework. First and foremost is, what do we mean when we talk about sustainability? I could probably go around this room and ask almost everyone in the room, and probably each one of you would come up with a little different definition of what sustainability means for you. Not necessarily bad, it's just different. But we thought we needed to come to a common understanding or a common articulation of what we're talking about within the pork industry when we talk about sustainable pig production. Then developing key performance indicators. What are going to be those areas that we want to try to focus on? What's going to be included in this framework? And then some impact metrics. What are we going to measure to be able to determine, are we making progress? Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Do we need to make adjustments? And then you see the various other steps there as well. We worked with a Sustainable Pork Advisory Council. We invited 28 folks representing the restaurant industry, food service, retail, packers and processors, and fully half of the membership was derived from pork producers from the pork industry, checkoff paying members, representatives from NPPC, and folks that are actively engaged in producing pigs. Again, Dr. Matlock from University of Arkansas served as the impartial facilitation and technical support for the group. We made it clear very early on that this group was simply and only addressing the live swine pig production. It's not our role to sit there and define sustainability or sustainability measures for the processors, packers, the retails, or side or the others. Our job was to focus on the live swine side, and that their job was solely to make recommendations to the National Pork Board of Directors for their consideration. As for a definition, we actually came up with a tagline definition, which is the part that you see in bold, and then a more narrative type of expounding upon what we're really talking about, and showing how we care, which brings in the we care principles, doing more to benefit people, pigs, and the recommendation of the advisory council was the environment, but when the pork board themselves got to looking at it, they liked the term planet, so the two are interchangeable. And if you notice down at the bottom, the board has embraced it so much that it's actually part of the new templates that we're using for overheads and for a lot of our public facing. And you'll also notice that those bullet points down at the bottom look closely comport with the We Care ethical principles. We identified 4 key performance indicator categories: human health and safety, animal care and welfare, environmental stewardship, and economic integrity. The advisory council came up with recommendations for what might be used for critical metric points under each of those key performance indicators. Again, this was just a recommendation to start from, but the council recognized they really didn't have the expertise to get down any deeper than this level, and in fact remanded the selection, at least a first cut selection or recommendation of what would be the critical metric points to the relevant committees within the National Pork Board, and the expertise that resides in the Pork Board amongst the producers, allied industry members that serve on those committees, and science advisors to flesh out recommendations for what should be the first cut of critical metric points. And again, we gave them some guidance of, as they were considering that, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Smart metrics is what we were looking for, to the fullest extent being science-based and technology neutral, trying to the fullest extent articulate outcomes rather than just a narrative, actually have a measuring point, and really only rely on a narrative standard when we really couldn't come up with anything of a numerical nature at this point in time. And you see the various other considerations that they were given. What we finally came away with was under the human health and safety side. You see there the critical metric points that we will be tracking. Days away, restricted or transferred, worker injury incident rate, workers' compensation costs, violative residues, and market hogs, and medication and treatment records. On the animal welfare side, again, most of the information on the animal welfare side is going to be evolving as the new single audit system that Sherry Niekamp, our Director of Animal Welfare, has worked closely with lots of folks in the industry to put together. That's going to serve as a focal point for getting a lot of the performance results in this particular area. But again, we'll be looking at caretaker training, timely euthanasia, excuse me, and welfare audit scores. Actually, on the environmental stewardship side, we probably had the easiest because we've done all the work on the 4 pillars of environmental sustainability, and we've already essentially benchmarked where we're starting from in terms of where the industry is today in terms of a herd-weighted average. But we're going to look at the carbon footprint, water use footprint, land use footprint, and energy use on the farm for the production of the animals. And on the economic integrity side, we'll be looking at sow lifetime productivity, the mortality rate, grow-finish caloric efficiency, assess consumer perceptions and attitudes toward pork, and increase pork's U.S. share versus beef and chicken. Back to the 9 areas of sustainability framework. The areas that are shaded light are the areas that we have already successfully addressed up to this point. We have a definition. We've identified key performance indicators. We've defined at least an initial cut of critical metric points. For many of those, especially on the environmental side, we have benchmarked performance for each metric in terms of where we are today. And in terms of develop and adopt goals for improvement across each metric, that has been accomplished as well. The Pork Board of Directors approved a new strategic plan that will cover 2015 to 2020. That begins the start of this year. They have approved that, and if you look at that strategic plan, articulated under the 3 goals are objectives, and almost all of those objectives relate back to the articulating goals, aspirational goals. For example, on the environmental side, We've essentially put forth as objective that we're going to reduce our water, carbon, and land footprint by an additional 5% by the year 2020. There have been goals articulated in the other areas as well. So we have articulated goals. Our task now is to, and we will be working on it this year, is developing a sustainability measurement and reporting system. How do we gather in the data so that we can track, are we making progress? Are we not? What do we need to be doing next? Which will help us drive development of improvement strategies, report results to the public at large, especially to our producers, and help guide us for making adjustments and adaptations as necessary. The sustainability framework, or sustainability, is not it's a journey. It's a journey of continuous improvement. It's not an endpoint. So this is not to say that we've completed the task. We've actually are now just beginning the task of going down the road of sustainability. We have a lot of work yet to do. We have to complete the land footprint. We have to be working on completing the non-greenhouse gas air footprint, which we've completed about 90% of that. We have a job yet to do to do some translation into the new version 3 of the footprint tool, the calculator that we've developed. We have work to do to probably better identify how the pork industry relates to other proteins in terms of our relative footprints, whether it be domestically or internationally, as well as other food substances, to address some of the things that were pointed out in one of the presentations, where what's the footprint of, in that particular case, it was beef versus vegetables. Well, it depends on what it takes to get to the same nutritional efficiency. So we've got a lot of that translational and interpretation work yet to be done. But I think we've come a long ways, and I think all kudos to the pork producers of the country. One of the things I like working for the pork board and for the pork industry is they have never kind of stuck their head in the sand and say, we don't have an issue, we don't have a problem. They've always said, let's find out if we do, and if we do, then let's go find answers and let's go find solutions.